Every night, just a few minutes before 3:03 a.m., I find myself growing increasingly tense, regardless of how quiet the evening has been up to that point. It doesn't matter if nothing strange has happened or shift. There's a creeping pressure in my chest as that time draws near. I've come to recognize the signs. The air feels a little heavier. The fluorescent lights flicker longer than usual, and a chill creeps down my spine, even though the heaters hum softly through the building. At first, I thought the rule was just some kind of hazing ritual meant to scare new guards. At 3:03, you lock yourself in and don't watch the monitors. That's what my supervisor said, with a completely straight face during training. No explanation, no humor. Just a serious warning that I brushed off too easily. My first few nights, I didn't follow the rule. I stayed seated at the desk, leaned back in the creaky chair with my feet up, sipping cheap coffee and glancing at the hallway feeds without a second thought. But on the fourth night, something changed. At exactly 3:03, every screen on the monitor setup went black for a full 3 seconds. When they came back on, only one feed remained active: the third-floor corridor near apartment 312. I leaned forward, squinting. The hallway was dark, more so than usual, and there was movement. Something slow, something tall. It moved in short, jerking steps, like it wasn't fully in control of its limbs. My heart dropped as I stared, unsure if I was watching a drunk tenant stumbling around or something else entirely. It turned its head toward the hallway camera. No face, just a void where a face should be. Smooth skin stretched over the front of its head like wax. Then the screen flickered. The thing was gone. I don't mean it walked away, I mean it disappeared, instantly. And then the monitor in my office, my own feed, started to go fuzzy. That was enough for me. I locked the security office door and pulled the blinds down on the tiny window. I stayed frozen in the chair for the next 30 minutes, heart pounding, barely blinking. The next morning, I confronted my supervisor. All he did was nod and say, "That's why we don't look." I asked him what it was. He didn't answer. He just muttered, "If it sees you back, it remembers." That was the part that got under my skin. It remembers. As if it knew I'd been watching. As if it had registered me as someone who shouldn't have seen it. I started following the rules strictly after that. Every night, 10 minutes before 3:03, I make sure the security office door is locked, all blinds drawn, and I turn every single monitor off. It's the only time I do that. Every other moment of my shift, the feeds are running. But not then. I've heard sounds outside during that hour: soft footsteps, something brushing against the metal door, a faint clicking like someone tapping long nails on the doorknob. The worst was the night I heard breathing, right outside. The door, slow, rhythmic, just loud enough to let me know someone or something was there. I didn't dare move. I didn't even let myself exhale. After a while, the sound faded, and I waited an extra 20 minutes before turning the monitors back on. The third-floor hallway feed was normal again. No movement. Just a long, empty corridor with flickering ceiling lights and old carpet. One night, out of morbid curiosity, I left a sticky note on the third floor during my rounds, just before 2:30 a.m. It said, "Who are you?" I stuck it to the wall, right in view of the camera. That night, after 3:03 passed and I turned the feed back on, the note was gone. No trace of it. I checked the hallway myself after sunrise. It wasn't there. But someone had written something in the dust on the floor where the note had been. 5 words, crooked and jagged. "You shouldn't be watching." I didn't tell anyone about that. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else in the building knows. The tenants seem normal, families, retirees, quiet loners, but occasionally I catch someone glancing at the security cameras with a weird expression, like they're aware, like they've seen something, too. No one talks about it, though. Everyone here pretends things are normal. Maybe they have to dot every now and then. I see that same corridor camera feed flicker during other hours, just for a moment, once, around 7 p.m., while tenants were returning from work. The screen blinked and showed the hallway completely empty, despite someone walking through it just seconds before. It lasted half a second, then snapped back to real time. I checked with the tenant later. He didn't notice anything odd, but something about the look in his eyes told me he'd felt it. That same heavy pressure in the air. That same instinct to not ask questions. The rules are simple. The rules are firm. The rules are not suggestions. Lock the door. Turn off the monitors. Don't watch, because if you do, it might see you. And if it sees you once, it never forgets. The list of rules was handed to me on my first night, printed on an old, yellowed sheet of paper, taped to the wall beside the key rack. Most of them seemed absurd at first glance. Rule number 4 especially stood out. Do not speak to the woman in the red dress. She does not live here. I remember laughing under my breath, thinking it was a joke. A scare tactic, maybe. Something to make the new guy paranoid on his first shift. But the longer I worked there, the more that rule lingered in the back of my mind. I went 2 weeks without seeing her. Everything was routine: locking the stairwell doors, checking hallway cameras, jotting down times in the logbook. Then, one night, just past midnight, the feed from the east side lobby showed her. She was standing near the vending machine, unmoving, with her back turned to the camera. Her dress was a deep, blood-red color, tight around the waist, her long, black hair falling straight down her back. I squinted at the screen, trying to figure out which tenant she could be. The apartments had a lot of residents, but I'd memorized most of their faces. And this woman didn't look familiar. She didn't move for 5 minutes. I kept glancing at the screen, wondering if the feed was frozen. But no, the flickering lights overhead and the changing time stamp confirmed it was live. Just as I leaned forward to get a closer look, she slowly turned, not all the way, just enough for me to glimpse part of her face. Her mouth was open just slightly, as if whispering something I couldn't hear. Her eyes didn't blink. They didn't even reflect light. My chest tightened, and I immediately remembered the rule. I looked away from the monitor, pushed my chair back, and tried to distract myself with paperwork. But curiosity itched at the edge of my thoughts. Who was she? Was this an elaborate prank? 10 minutes later, I checked the feed again. She was gone. Not walking away, not leaving through the doors. Just gone, as if she had never been there. That was the first night. Over the next several days, she began to appear more frequently, always at odd hours, never during the day. Once, she stood just outside the laundry room. Another time, she was in the basement, facing the wall. The worst night was when I caught her standing in the hallway directly outside the security office. The camera feed glitched when I tried to zoom in, and I lost signal for a full minute. When the feed returned, she was gone again. But the sound of something brushing against the office door lingered in my ears, long after it was on the 5th night of her appearances that I made my mistake. I was doing my rounds, walking down the second-floor hallway, when I turned the corner and saw her in person for the first time. She stood about 20 feet away, in front of apartment 204, her head tilted ever so slightly, as if studying the door in front of her. My footsteps froze. I stood still, holding my breath. The lights flickered twice. She didn't react. I tried to slowly step back, not wanting to draw attention. But just then, her head turned sharply. Not her body just, her head spinning, at an unnatural angle until she was looking straight at me. Her eyes were empty, hollow, no pupils, no whites, just dark voids. She smiled, slowly, as though trying to remember how. I panicked and said, "Ma'am, are you okay?" My voice echoed. Down the hallway, her expression didn't change, but her body began to move, jolting forward with quick, unbalanced steps. I turned and ran back toward the stairwell, heart thundering. I didn't look back. Not once. When I got back to the office, I locked the door and checked the cameras. She was gone, vanished, as always. But I had broken the rule. I had spoken to her, and now things are different. Since that night, I've heard someone whispering my name during the shift. Sometimes it comes from the vents, sometimes from just outside the office door. The other guards say nothing when I mention her. One even told me she only speaks to the ones who speak first. That terrified me more than anything, because it confirmed what I had feared others knew. But they refused to break the silence. One night, I found a note slid under the door, not typed, not written by hand. It was etched into the paper as if carved by a needle. It said, "You saw me. You spoke. Now I remember your voice." I sat there for nearly an hour, frozen, trying to decide whether to leave or stay. But I've learned one thing. Running doesn't help. No matter where I am in the building, she finds me, always watching, always listening. The rule makes sense now. It's not there for fun. It's not a prank. It's a warning and a boundary. By breaking it, I invited something into my life I don't understand. I see her now, even when she isn't on the camera feeds. Sometimes I think I glimpse her reflection in the windows at night. Sometimes I hear her walking behind me, but when I turn, nothing's there. Other times, the radio crackles with static and faint laughter, even when it's turned off. I still work here because I feel like if I leave, she'll follow me beyond the building. The rule didn't say what happens if you talk to her only, that you shouldn't. I think about that every night as I begin my shift. And every time I pass the taped rules on the wall, I pause for just a second longer, knowing I've already crossed a line I can't uncross. Every night at Willow Oaks, I checked the same list of tasks walking the perimeter, logging entry times, scanning the cameras. It was all part of the job. But there was one task on that list that made my skin crawl. Do not, under any circumstance, enter apartment 103. If the door is open, close it and leave immediately. If someone calls from that unit, ignore it. The first few nights, I avoided the door entirely, just like instructed. It was easier that way. The hallway outside 103 always felt colder than the rest of the building. The overhead lights there flickered more than they should, as if something in the wiring refused to stay stable. The silence in that hallway felt wrong, too still, like sound refused to travel properly. It made my ears feel like they were plugged, like I was underwater. I asked one of the older guards about it once. He looked at me like I had mentioned something cursed. "Don't talk about that room," he said, and then walked away. I didn't push. I figured he was messing with me. Still, I followed the rule. I never touched the door. But on my seventh night, I found it wide open. It was around 2 a.m. The security camera for that floor was glitching black, static flooding half the screen. I went up to do a manual walkthrough and double-check the hallway. As I turned the corner, I saw the door to 103 slightly ajar, light leaking out from inside. It was a sickly green glow, like the kind you see in hospitals under emergency lighting. My breath caught in my throat. I stood frozen for a moment, heart pounding in my ears. Every part of me wanted to turn and walk away, to pretend I hadn't seen anything, but my radio crackled suddenly, loudly, with static. A deep, raspy voice whispered, "You forgot to close the door." I stared at the radio in disbelief. It hadn't been transmitting. No one was on the other end. No one else used this channel. I looked back at the door. The green glow had vanished. Only darkness remained now, but the door was open wider, as if inviting me in. I didn't move closer. I pulled out my flashlight and aimed the beam at the gap. The light barely pierced the darkness beyond, and what I saw inside didn't make sense. That the apartment wasn't empty. It should have been. Records showed no tenant assigned to 103-4 over a year. But inside, I saw a table set for dinner. The plates were old, cracked. Rotten food sat untouched. Chairs were pushed slightly back, as if people had just gotten up from them. A dim chandelier swung slightly, even though no air moved. Then something moved in the corner. A shadow, taller than a man, hunched and jittering like a frame skipping. In a broken film reel, I shut the door. My hands shook as I locked it and stepped back. I told myself I imagined it, that my mind was tired, but I couldn't forget what I saw, or what I heard. Because as I turned to walk away, I heard the unmistakable sound of breathing just behind the door. Deep, steady, and far too close. The next night, the door was shut again, locked. I avoided the hallway entirely, but during my shift, the phone rang. It was the lobby line, which should only be used by residents. I picked it up and said my name. There was silence for a moment. Then a child's voice whispered, "Come back." I left the light on. I slammed the phone down. The call log showed it came from apartment 103. I checked the timestamp 3 times. The system didn't lie. That call shouldn't have happened. After that, things began to escalate. I would find chairs turned in the lobby when I knew I hadn't touched them. The elevator would stop on the first floor every night at exactly 3:17 a.m., even if no one was inside. And more than once, I found the key to 103 placed on my desk, even though I always left it locked in the safe. Each time, I put it back, pretending I hadn't seen it. But the message was clear. Something wanted me to open that door again. One night, I caved. Not fully, but I returned to the hallway, stood in front of the door, and listened. I don't know what I expected. Maybe silence. Maybe more breathing. But instead, I heard voices, overlapping whispers from behind the door, too many to count. Some spoke in English, others in gibberish. Some screamed, others wept. I felt tears on my own face, and I didn't know why. I ran. I reported it the next morning to the building supervisor. He didn't look surprised. He just asked if I had entered the apartment. I told him no. He nodded and replied, "Good. You'll last longer than the others." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to know. I still patrolled the building. I still checked the doors. But I never stop outside 103-4 more than a second. If the door is open, I close it. If the phone rings, I let it ring. That place, whatever it is, isn't just another room. It's watching and waiting. And I've learned that rules here aren't suggestions. They're survival. One of the most chilling rules on the list was the one about the lobby mirror. It was a large antique mirror that hung directly opposite the front desk, a tall, cracked thing with a heavy wooden frame that looked like it had come from some forgotten mansion. The rule was simple. Never look into the lobby mirror between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. If your reflection moves on its own, turn around and walk away without reacting. At first, I assumed this was some leftover prank from a previous guard, maybe a way to scare the new guy. But the first time I worked the full night shift, I understood why it was on the list. The mirror gave me an uneasy feeling even during the day. Something about its surface looked wrong, not dirty, just off. Like the reflection didn't quite match the reality in front of it. During the early part of my shift, everything seemed normal. I would catch the mirror in the corner of my eye and see nothing strange. But the closer it got to 2 a.m., the heavier the air around it seemed to get. The mirror would fog slightly, even though the rest of the lobby was room temperature. And the reflection, it began to lag. That's the best way I can describe it. If I moved too quickly, I'd see my reflection follow half a second later. I tried not to look directly into it, but it's hard to ignore something when you're told not to look. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I stood behind the desk and stared at the mirror as the clock hit 2:04 a.m. At first, nothing happened. My reflection stared back, matching every movement. But then I noticed my reflection's mouth slowly begin to curl into a grin, even though my own face was still. It was a sharp, unnatural grin, stretched wider than a mouth should go. I jumped back, heart racing. My body didn't move, in the mirror it just kept smiling. Then its head tilted slowly to one side. I turned away, remembering the rule: don't react, don't interact, just walk away. I backed into the hallway behind the desk and didn't come out until the sun came up. The next day, I asked the maintenance guy, Thomas, about it. He was an older man, quiet, always sipping coffee. When I mentioned the mirror, he stopped sipping and looked straight at me. "It's been there longer than the building," he said. "Don't mess with it. The last guy who did, well, they didn't find him. Just his reflection, still standing there, even now." After that, I never let myself look into the mirror between those hours. But sometimes, I saw others do it. Tenants who'd come back from late shifts, drunk college kids visiting friends. Most would just glance at it and keep walking. But a few would stop and stare. And that's when things would go wrong. One woman, a nurse, I think, stood in front of it at exactly 2:31 a.m. I was in the back office, but saw her on the security feed. She was waving, slowly, like someone was waving back, but no one was behind her. I rushed out to stop her, but by the time I got there, she was gone. No sound, no footsteps, just gone. The mirror was fogged over, and her reflection remained visible for almost 2 full minutes before it finally faded. I told my supervisor, but he just marked it down as tenant confusion. I knew better. The mirror had taken her. And the worst part, a week later, she showed up again, but something was wrong. Her face was too smooth, like her skin didn't sit right on her skull. She moved awkwardly, like someone unfamiliar with how bodies work. She didn't speak, just walked to the elevator and vanished. I asked the tenant she was supposed to be visiting. He said she never arrived. Her phone number was disconnected. Her apartment had been re-rented. but she kept appearing at the same time every week, just passing through the lobby and staring into the mirror. Eventually, I stopped asking questions. Every night, I kept my head down between 2 and 4 a.m., never turning toward the mirror, but it kept finding ways to get my attention. Once, I saw movement in my peripheral vision and couldn't resist. I looked. It was me, standing still, but my reflection raised a finger to its lips in a shushing motion. I hadn't moved. I ran straight out the front door and waited in my car until dawn. Now, even when I'm off duty, I see flashes of that mirror in my dreams. I wake up cold, heart racing, with the taste of glass in my mouth. I think it's watching me, even outside the building. Some nights I'll catch glimpses of myself in windows or car mirrors, and I'm not always looking back. I've come to believe that the mirror isn't just a mirror. It's a doorway, or maybe a trap. It's a thing pretending to be a reflection, waiting for someone to make the mistake of engaging. And once you do, you're marked. The building's rules aren't just weird superstitions, they're lines drawn in the sand. Cross them, and something on the other side notices. Something that doesn't like being watched. Something that smiles even when you don't. The final and most unsettling rule was the one about the apartment on the top floor, Unit 704. The rule stated, do not allow anyone to check into or enter Unit 704. If someone claims they live there, check the log. If it's empty, do not engage. If the unit appears open or occupied, contact management immediately. At first glance, this didn't make sense. How could someone try to enter a unit that was unlisted and supposed to be unoccupied? But over time, I learned this rule was more than just protocol, it was a warning. Unit 704 didn't appear on the active rental list. I confirmed this on my first week when I tried to familiarize myself with the building layout. The elevators went up to the 7th floor, and the hallway led to several units just like the floors below. But when I got to the door labeled 704, I noticed something strange. The door was solid black, unlike the others, which were a plain gray. It had no peephole, no doorbell, and the doorknob looked ancient, almost like wrought iron. I put my ear to it and heard nothing. But the doorknob was cold and naturally cold, even though the hallway was warm. For the first few weeks, I didn't think much about it beyond mild curiosity. I followed the rule and ignored it. But then, strange incidents began happening. Tenants would call down to the front desk, complaining of noises from the top floor, shuffling footsteps, a dragging sound, or sometimes loud knocking in the dead of night. I would go up to investigate, flashlight in hand, and every time I reached the hallway, it was silent, still, but I always felt something watching me from behind that black door. One night, around 3 a.m., the elevator dinged, and a woman stepped out. She looked normal at first, blonde hair, pale skin, wearing a red coat, but there was something off about her movements. Her steps were too slow, too deliberate. She came straight to the desk and asked for the key to Unit 704. Her voice was flat, almost robotic. I asked for her name and checked the logbook. Nothing, no record of her ever living there. I told her politely that the unit wasn't available and she should contact management. Her face didn't change, but her eyes locked onto mine. I live there, she said. I just stepped out for a moment. I told her again that there was no record and that the unit was not in use. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the elevator. I followed, worried she might try to go up anyway. Sure enough, the elevator doors closed before I could stop her. I took the stairs 2 at a time, heart pounding. When I got to the 7th floor, the hallway was dark. The lights had gone out, and all I had was my flashlight. I moved slowly toward Unit 704. The door was cracked open. I stood there, frozen. I hadn't opened it. No one had. Slowly, I pushed it open further. The apartment was pitch black. The beam of my flashlight only illuminated a few feet ahead, revealing old, dusty furniture covered in white sheets. The air smelled stale, like rot and wet wood. Then I heard it breathing, not mine. Slow, raspy breathing from deep inside. I backed out, slammed the door, and ran down to the front desk. I called the building manager immediately. He answered after the 3rd ring and just said one thing: "Don't go in. Lock the elevator to the 7th floor and never speak to her again." After that night, I followed that advice. I disabled access to the 7th floor from the elevator panel, and when anyone asked about Unit 704, I pretended it didn't exist. But it didn't stop people from trying. About a week later, a new resident came to the front desk, pale and sweating. He said he had taken the stairs to get some exercise and had seen a woman in a red coat standing in front of the black door. He said she looked lost, so he tried to speak to her, but she didn't turn around. Then she whispered something. He couldn't make it out, but whatever it was, it made him feel like something was crawling under his skin. More reports came in after that. Tenants claimed to see someone looking out of the small window above Unit 704, even though there were no lights on. One said she heard humming when walking past the door, an old, haunting lullaby. Maintenance refused to go near the unit. Eventually, I stopped responding to complaints from that floor altogether. It was safer that way. But the worst part came a month later, when I checked the security feed out of boredom during a slow night. The feed for the 7th floor flickered to life, and there she was, the woman in the red coat, standing completely still in the middle of the hallway, facing the camera. But the timestamp showed the footage was from 2 days ago. I fast-forwarded. She never moved, not once. Just stood there, watching. I checked the live feed, empty hallway. No sign of her. But then the screen flickered again, and for a split second, I saw her standing behind the front desk right where I was sitting. I shut off the feed and refused to look at it again. I don't know who or what lives in Unit 704, but I've come to realize it's not about the unit itself. It's a doorway, a place that doesn't follow the same rules as the rest of the building. Something lives there, pretending to be human, waiting for someone to let it in. And if you make the mistake of acknowledging it, it doesn't just stay in the apartment anymore. It follows you, watches you, and eventually it tries to replace you.